Hello, my fellow 90 in 90 adventurers. We are 1 week in and well on our way with our one core sentence memorized in a few different variations, and I'm feeling pretty good. I feel like they're in there. So before we move on to our second sentence, I just want to share with you really what I believe is the difference between being able to get traction in the language and be able to communicate and then get the positive reinforcement of being understood and then just go up and up and up and up and up and up and up in your progress. And I think it's the same reason why French people, Parisians in particular, often get called snobs. So listen to this. This is my theory on that. And I kind of formed this over the years that I lived in a French-speaking place, Luxembourg, where there were French-speaking French people, French-speaking Belgian people, and French-speaking foreigners who had to speak French to live there. In my experience of learning to speak French, for which I was very resistant, by the way, I was like, oh, I'm only going to be here a short period of time and I'm just here to travel. I'm not going to learn French. That didn't work out. It was a kind of place where you had to ask the person behind the counter, could you pass me that bread? I'd like that cheese. Somebody knocks on your door and you got to answer it, and you've got to be able to speak to them, which by the way I didn't. Sometimes I just used to literally ignore my doorbell until I realized, you know what, you just got to embrace this. And in the beginning, in that resistant mind frame, I was basically saying the French words in the way that I would say English words. So my mouth would move, my tongue would move, my voice, the way of the song would be pretty much English with French words. And what happens is nobody understands you. Because in going back to the Parisians, I found that French particularly, but I guess this applies for a lot of languages, is that if you don't get the emphasis and the pronunciation in exactly the right way, the people genuinely don't know what you're saying, and it feels to you like you're saying it perfectly, and you just don't understand why people can't get what you're saying, and it can become quite disheartening. But it's because it's as if somebody says, hey, you're putting the wrong emphasis on the wrong syllable, and you're like, what? But it can make a big difference. Now, generally English is very forgiving for that, but other languages aren't. So here's my encouragement to you. This was my epiphany. I realized that if I impersonated a French person when I spoke French, suddenly I was understood. And in fact, people used to compliment me on my accent. Oh wow, your pronunciation is so good. And when I was in the height of there before I left, people would be like, what, are you French speaking? Is that your, like, what's this accent you've got? Not that I was ever accurate grammatically, but that reinforces my point of fluency being more important. So for example, when I was teaching English, I would have to decide which level somebody would go into from 0 to 7 based on an interview that I did with them. And I found consistently I'd put people by accident in a higher group than they belonged if they spoke quickly to me in the interview. I was fooled. I thought that they spoke English better. And then once they were in the class, I was like, oh, I've made a mistake. These people don't actually have the understanding that I thought they did, just because they spoke fast. And by fast, I want to translate to fluent now. So without hesitating, quickly, with a certain speed, and most importantly, mimicking the natural song of the language. Now here's a perfect example. If somebody speaks to you in a French accent, but for the most part is mimicking the song of English, you'd know that they were French speaking, but you'd understand them very well. Maybe something like, you know, my first language is French, but I understand English very well. Versus somebody who's speaking to you in English, but not making any effort to change from the natural French songs to the English one, like, you know, my first language it is French, but I understand English very well. There's a big difference. And as an English speaker, for the second one, you have to listen really hard. So that's a perfect example. example of what I started applying in, 1 week in and well on our way with our one core sentence memorized in a few different variations. And I think it's the same reason why French people, Parisians in particular, often get called snobs. while I was living in Luxembourg. And it meant, what was the experience of that for me? It meant I had to literally channel my inner French person, so that I really spoke like a French person. So if you are channeling your French, you know the mouth, it goes a little different, the head, the gestures. So that if somebody asked me, do you speak French? I'd say, pas parfaitement, mais je comprends la plupart. And then people be like, oh wow, that was your accent. And it's because I'm impersonating a French person versus saying it exactly like I would when I'm speaking English, as I speak English. Oui, je comprends la plupart, mais pas parfaitement. That's the equivalent of the very strong Frenchman accent I did just now. So that's what I want to leave with you. When it comes to isiXhosa, how does the mouth move? What's the song? What's emphasized in the word? For example, we learned libomvu. We say that with an English accent, it's libomvu. But if you listen to that model sentence, which is why you have the model sentence, much more important in the video, Mandisa's actually saying libomvu. Whatever image, if you have to draw, if you have to attach it, associate it to something else, what will make you remember to say fu? For me, it's like a lazy sound at the end. So that's the kind of thinking that I want to encourage you to have. And while you're doing that, have fun. Bye guys!